Welcome on in to another college edition here of Gold Sheet TV. Joining me again is mid-major Matt, or if you want to call him Group of Five, Matt. He has an always changing nickname depending on which teams he's cashing in on. I love it. And man, Tuesday's show was terrific. Today we're going to be looking more into some specific conferences, talking ACC, Sun Belt, the MAC, CUSA, and we're going to end with the Mountain West. So Matt's going to get you ready to go. All we ask you to do, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss any of our great shows here. And Matt, I say we get right into it and start with maybe the headliner, at least one of the Power Five, and talk a little ACC. I guess just start with the overview, because it feels like the haves and the have-nots when you look at Clemson, Florida State. Are they really that far ahead of everybody else in this conference?
Yeah, it felt like that. And when I was in Charlotte for ACC Media Day last month, that was kind of the prevailing thought was there's two teams in the first tier, and there's about 5 or 6 in the second tier, and then about 4 or 5 in that final tier, and for good reason. I mean, Clemson and Florida State are really good. Clemson's always going to have good defense, and their offense is going to be a lot better with Garrett Riley as their offensive coordinator. They finally have the quarterback they want in Cade Klubnik, and then Florida State. They have a lot of the pieces back from a team that went and was very good last year. And so we'll see if Florida State can be rapidly returned to the very good team they were year after year many years ago. But I think it's interesting that there's a lot of people who are like, well, the ACC is not going to be great this year. I actually disagree. I think this is going to be a very good conference, because that middle, you could see any of those 5 or 6 teams be third place, and you could even see one of them potentially be second place if things break right. So I think the ACC this year, which has been down the past couple of years, is actually going to be up this year. We're going to see a lot of good football coming from this conference.
Yeah, and I think even just inside the conference, I think back to when we were talking on Tuesday, and one of the teams that you were a little bit bullish on heading into the season on some potential long shot value would be a team like Pitt. So I'm wondering, as far as in-conference goes, anything else you kind of see as maybe a sleeper team, that it's not just those two teams in the top tier?
Yeah, as you mentioned, we talked about it Tuesday. Pittsburgh is one of those teams that does everything in silence. Nobody really pays attention to them. They're not flashy. They don't do anything that draws headlines other than just win games when they need to. But I also like NC State, and I've made the joke everywhere. These are famous last words, because anytime we depend on NC State, they get too many injuries. They lose games they're not supposed to. Case in point, last year they had a lot of injuries. They lost a game to my alma mater, Syracuse, that they probably shouldn't have. But once again, I think this year they kind of come a little bit under the radar. I picked them third in my preseason poll down in Charlotte. They finished fourth behind North Carolina. Brennan Armstrong is their quarterback. He comes over from Virginia after a miserable year with the Cavaliers last year. He just didn't fit with Tony Elliott's offense. But if you remember 2 years ago, he had a really good year with Robert Anae, the offensive coordinator. Well, Robert Anae's now in Raleigh. You've got an NC State team that's got a lot of huge games at home. They get NC State at home. They get Miami at home. They get they get Notre Dame at home. They get Miami at home. They get Clemson at home. They get a lot of these games in front of their fans. And I believe in the Wolfpack this year. Their number, I believe, was 6.5 for the win total. I took the over there. I even sprinkled a little bit on 7 for the push potential there. I think they have a chance to get 8 or 9 wins this season if things break right, and for once they actually don't have a lot of injuries that kill them.
Yeah, great breakdown there on the Wolfpack. Hop below in the comments. Let us know what you think about the ACC. Final thoughts before we move on to the Sun Belt. We talked about those 4 teams, but what about BC? You have Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, of course, Virginia, the Cavs there as well. Any value in the bottom teams, I guess, as we head on into the season, or is it just, wait and see for you, Matt?
Well, I think Boston College is one of those teams that every once in a while, they get some upsets in Chestnut Hill.
Yeah.
It's, a dreary place. The fans aren't exactly the greatest, but early on this season when there's hope, there actually is a pretty good crowd there. And then as the season goes on, it just becomes more belligerent fans, I think is a way to put it, which is fine. And that makes for an atmosphere. If you watch their basketball games, they get some upsets there. So, Florida State has to go to Chestnut Hill. Several other good teams have to go to Chestnut Hill. I think Boston College is getting somebody this year. A little concerned about their defense. They've lost some key pieces. A little concerned about their offense. Phil Dracovic, their quarterback, went to Pittsburgh. So a little bit of a concern there. And then you got the Virginia schools who I think are going to be bad. Virginia, unfortunately, is just a talent-deficient team right now. They have a lot of tough games. That first one against Tennessee, that's a really tough game to open things up with. Then they get James Madison, who I think is a really good team. We'll talk about them a little bit later. So Virginia's numbers really low for good reason. Virginia Tech's offense I don't think is going to be very good this year, although it will be better. They have a legit number one wide receiver for once. So I think Virginia Tech will be an interesting team to watch as the season goes on. And then Georgia Tech, who always has a really tough non-conference schedule. It's really tough once again, although they do get an FCS school and they get Bowling Green this year. But Georgia Tech, once again, one of those schools that's a little talent deficient in a conference that we've already talked about, I think is going to be pretty good this year.
Yeah, great breakdown there on the ACC. Let us know what you're thinking for this conference. And it's funny, you mentioned James Madison. Well, let's swing it to the Sun Belt. And I guess, Matt, for a lot of college football fans, I feel like people end up just getting caught up in the Power Five, and rightfully so, especially with just how things are stacked up. Those are the teams you're going to be hearing more about. It's teams that you're going to be talking more about when you talk playoff time, but there is value to be had elsewhere, and that's where you've made a living. But Sun Belt, tell me and the listeners and viewers, why should we care about the Sun Belt, Matt?
Well, in the grand scheme of things, the Sun Belt's done everything right when it comes to realignment. I mean, if you look at the footprint that the Sun Belt has, they have a graphic that's out there, and basically it's essentially in a very nice contained area. It's not Conference USA. It's not AAC where teams are all over the place, Big 10, Big 12. So it starts out with the fact that they know what they are, and they built a conference that made them even better. When you bring in Marshall, and you bring in a Southern Miss, and you bring in a James Madison, and Old Dominion for other sports, but exactly what you're looking for, and I think it helps. You've got a lot of old school rivalries there. App State and some of these schools don't like each other. Coastal Carolina is getting better. You've got teams and schools that are committing to facilities, and they're committing to making their football programs good. And every year we see upsets. Sun Belt schools are usually double-digit underdogs to some of the Power 5 schools, and I think there's a chance that some of them can get victories outright this year. So the Sun Belt is one of those conferences. They are, I would say, the sixth best conference. Hell, I would say they're even right on par somewhat with the Pac-12. Now, some people are going to think that's crazy because the top of the Pac-12 is really good with USC and Oregon and Washington, but I'll put the Sun Belt against the middle of that conference any time of the year. UCLA and Oregon State and some of those schools. I think the Sun Belt's really good, and there's going to be some opportunities for upsets or at least double-digit covers in some of these games against the Power 5.
Yeah, and we should have, before we threw up the App State logo there, we probably should have given a trigger warning to any Big Ten fans out there. So sorry we didn't warn you that the Appalachian State was hopping up there. As far as just expectations inside the conference, you mentioned you might be seeing some potential upsets, definitely some ATS plays throughout the year, maybe from Matt Joseph's on the Sun Belt. But as far as it's being self-contained, a team that you know well is JMU, James Madison. They're projected to be finishing first there in the East. Agree, disagree? What are you thinking, Matt?
So here's the interesting thing, and you have to make sure that when you bet on this, if you want to bet on the Sun Belt, you have to make sure that the book clarifies, do they want the Eastern Division champion or do they want a representative who's actually going to play in the title game? For the second straight year, JMU is not allowed to play in the Sun Belt Championship game, even if they win the East. The NCAA foolishly would not approve a waiver. They did everything they were supposed to last year in terms of playing a full Sun Belt schedule because for those who are not familiar, JMU was FCS 2 years ago. They were one of the best FCS schools in America 2 years ago. They made the transition to FBS last year. Unlike a lot of teams in that make the jump, they played a full Sun Belt schedule. The only thing they didn't do is they played 11 games instead of 12. They had 2 byes. There was a chance that they were going to get a waiver and be allowed to be bowl eligible for this season and to play in the Sun Belt Championship game. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So you have to make sure if you are betting this market that your book clarifies, is it the Eastern Division champion, which JMU can be, or is it the Eastern Division representative in the title game, which JMU cannot be? And you know how books love to be ambiguous about this sort of thing. But on the field, I think we only saw one player leave after the spring. It was a guy who transferred to Ole Miss. I mean, I can't fault a guy from going from the Sun Belt to the SEC, but Kurt Cignetti's been able to keep this team together. And if they figure out their quarterback situation, they've got a really good defense. They've got skill position guys. If he can keep them motivated all year long, I think they can win the East. Now, that's tough. You've got Coastal Carolina, who has Grayson McCall back. You have App State, who has a winning tradition year after year. You have Georgia Southern. Clay Helton has brought in a ton of transfers. If Georgia Southern had a better schedule in conference, I think they could win the East, but they get a really tough one. You've got Georgia State, who has their quarterback back, and then you've got the only team that's pretty much not going to win is Old Dominion. Marshall's really good, so it's a tough division in the East. JMU is my pick here, but by the slimmest of margins.
Yeah, and honestly, if you just listen to that breakdown, you're probably already more prepared to bet the Sun Belt than 3/4 of people out there. So make sure you give Matt a follow at Mid-Major Matt and check him out, sm.buzz/MJ. All right, one conference that everybody knows because some midweek action on the MAC is undeniably amazing when you're looking for a little football midweek. So Maction. I mean, the hashtag Maction, Matt. We know it. We love it. But we need you to get us ready for it. So any early thoughts just heading into the conference, maybe teams bet on, bet against, or just an overview as a whole?
Well, I mean, I think this conference is once again going to be run by Toledo, I think. And by the way, for the people who follow me on Twitter, last 2 years I've nailed the champion in this conference. Had Ball State 2 years ago and then had Toledo last year. So I've had a good feel for how this conference goes. Toledo brings everybody back, pretty much everybody. And that is tough considering they won the championship last year. Now, Toledo has had this thing in the past couple of years that hasn't really hurt them last year, but they lose games they're not supposed to. They had some injuries at quarterback last year, which made the end of their season a little rocky. But this is a team that has one of the best defenses in the country. They have a great cornerback duo. Their front seven is pretty good. If everything breaks right, Toledo is the class of this division once again. Now, if you're going to try and beat Toledo, which you can potentially, I look at this Northern Illinois team. Northern Illinois last year, unfortunately, I lost in their over. Last year, I've given out the over in several places here once again, over 5.5 wins. Northern Illinois got ravaged by injuries. Rocky Lombardi got hurt. Literally everybody of substance got hurt on this team, and then it showed on the field. Their offense struggled. Their defense was on the field too much, and they underperformed. Now you've got essentially a lot of the same players back. They brought in a running back from Iowa, which means he's pretty good. And I think that they're just going to be a solid team. I think they can win 8 games. They play at Toledo, which probably will make a difference in terms of the standings. And it's an early game. I believe it's in late September, early October. So I think that's going to make a difference in the Western Division. And then when you look at the Eastern Division, I really like Miami of Ohio. I really think that Miami of Ohio with Brett Gabbert is an opportunity here. Now, the reason why it's a little bit hesitant here, they have to play Toledo, which makes a difference. One of those, Eastern Division, Western Division things. So they unfortunately do that. And they play at Ohio, who I think a lot of people like to win this division outright. So that's 2 really tough games, whereas Ohio skips Toledo and gets a little bit of an easier cross-division play. So that makes a difference there. But if you're looking for a sleeper outside of Toledo here, I think Miami, Ohio, Brett Gabbert's health is huge, of course, because he's been injured. But I think that Miami, Ohio, the Red Hawks represent an opportunity to knock off Toledo if anybody's going to do it in this conference.
Man, I can feel the action already. That's my man, Mid-Major Matt. All right, you talked earlier about just the dreadful grouping in some of these conferences, and CUSA is maybe the poster child of that. So, even though it may be just a dreadful grouping of teams, there could potentially still be betting value. And that's all we care about, Matt. So I guess CUSA, similar overview, any teams that maybe stand out to you on potential moneymakers as you head into the season?
Yeah, Conference USA is interesting because I think a lot of people think it's just going to be Western Kentucky and Liberty. Western Kentucky is a team that I've liked for several years. Austin Reed is back once again. He's got several of his wide receivers. We know that this team's going to be an over team. They're going to be an over team for a while. You're going to see a lot of high totals. Their defense is getting better, but it's still not there. Their offense is going to score a lot of points. They're going to give up a lot of points. And then Liberty, they bring in Jamie Chadwell from Coastal Carolina. They have arguably the easiest schedule in America, Liberty does. And so I think that's going to be a huge help here. But they also don't have a lot of starters coming back. There's, new players learning new systems from new coaches. So I feel like they are the vulnerable one of the two of them. So there's two teams I kind of like a little bit on the outside here. And one is Middle Tennessee. Middle Tennessee, the Blue Raiders here are a team that has a really good defense, like a really good defense. Problem is they've had some, poor quarterback play. So if they can figure out their quarterback play and improve their offense a little bit, they've got a solid running back, some solid wide receivers. Middle Tennessee is one of those teams that can kind of inch their way in. Now, they have a little bit of a scheduling issue in terms of some of the schedule things that they have. They have to play at Western Kentucky. They have to play at Liberty, so that doesn't help them very much. The other team to consider here is UTEP. UTEP has Gavin Hardison back. They have a really good offense. They have some names on defense that are pretty good. UTEP has a little bit of a better scheduling spot. They host Western Kentucky. They host Liberty, but they also play at Middle Tennessee, which could decide something there. And first game of the year is at Jacksonville State, and the Gamecocks, who are one of two teams making the FCS to FBS transition here. Jacksonville State's coached by Rich Rodriguez. He knows a lot about the FBS level. Jacksonville State's got a really good ground game. They know who they are. Their quarterback, Zion Webb, has been in the NCAA for like 8 or 9 years, which I think helps that he's a veteran of college football. Problem is their defense is still somewhat FCS level, so they're going to be in a lot of shootouts. Can their ground game keep the opposition off the field? There's a chance that Jacksonville State springs the upset week 1 over UTEP there. So it's kind of like, do you like the team that's better in UTEP, or do you like the team that maybe has a better scheduling spot in Middle Tennessee if you're trying to figure out who could knock off Liberty as that team who will play most likely Western Kentucky in the title game?
Man, I love it. Follow Mid-Major Matt on Twitter and hop below in the comments and let us know what you think. And even just an overview as well. Do you like betting some of these Group of 5 conferences more than just looking at the Power 5? So hop below and let us know here on GoldSheet TV. Last one we want to get into here is Mountain West. And if you ask a lot of people, this one's already decided. Isn't it just Boise versus Air Force in the title game? Isn't this one we just chalk it up, Matt? Or are you betting this a different way?
I mean, I think I agree. I mean, if you were to look on paper, those are clearly the two best teams. They're like the ACC in terms of Clemson, Florida State. But you can poke little holes in both of those programs. Air Force is breaking in a new quarterback, but Air Force is one of those things that I feel like if you give the coaching staff a couple months, like you and I could probably run the triple option because the coaching staff at Air Force is just that good. Their defense is usually pretty good. Money. So I think a lot of people.
I'd pay money. I think. I would.
It would be interesting. The triple option is a little tougher, but we'll see. But I think that Air Force is the vulnerable one of the two of them if you were to pick one. Boise State's got a really good defense. I've talked about on this show, I like Talon Green to win the Heisman. I got it at 500 to 1. I fully expect the bet to lose, but I think Talon Green's got good capabilities. He's got a good running back. He's got a good wide receiver. They did lose one of their wide receivers to an injury, so that's going to hurt a little bit. But I think Boise State's got a good scheduling spot in terms of the conference, so I think they're the one that I feel more comfortable about. The outside team that I think that's very interesting is San Jose State. They bring back Siobhan Cordero, several of their key weapons on offense. The problem is their defensive line, which was so good and helped them win games last year, completely wiped out. All the guys are gone, whether it's transfers or going to the pros. So San Jose State kind of has to rebuild that defensive line. You hope they kind of do it in those early games of the season. They play at Toledo, which I think is interesting. They play at Boise State, which is rather interesting. But if they can figure out this defense thing and match it with the offense that I expect to be really good, I think San Jose State is the sleeper here. And I'll bring this up because I thought it was interesting. Colorado State last year was miserable. They did not score over 20 points a single time last season. They just couldn't figure out their new system. There's a lot of people who believe in Colorado State's over. It's funny because I actually loved Colorado State's under. Their schedule was kind of tough. And I talked to a lot of people, including some people on our website who were like, yeah, I think Colorado State's a sleeper. They could potentially be a bowl team. So it'll be interesting to see if they are right that Colorado State is this sleeper that we kind of think of, or if I was right that Colorado State's under was the play there. But I'll be interested to see what the Rams do out of Colorado State in year 2 of their system with their new head coach.
Yeah, great breakdown there. And I will say I can read the dive action with the best of them. And during those NCAA football games, I was always beating people down there with the triple option. So I'd bet on us, Matt, in that one. But terrific breakdown there, man. I mean, less than 20 minutes, and we got people ready to go across multiple different conferences. Tell folks about what you have cooking for this season and how they can ride with not one of the best college football handicapper at either site.
Yeah, up over 150 units the last 3 seasons, as you mentioned, better than everybody at WagerTalk and everybody at Sports Memo. And I think it's just I look at things a little bit differently. I like to play some first quarter things. I like to play some first half things. I love playing team totals. So if you are considering joining me for a week, a month, a season, whatever it is, make sure your book has team totals because there's a lot of my plays that come from there. Because as we talked about it a little bit on the show before on Tuesday, I like to reduce the amount of variables. Why depend on 4 units when I can only depend on 2? Basically, one team's offense against one team's defense. Forget, like, you can almost take a break the other half of the game. So I like to play a lot of team totals. There are 7 games in week 0. There are 3 potential spots that I'm looking at. Obviously, I want to wait till it's a little closer, make sure there's no injuries, make sure there's no weather situations. Thank God we're over the COVID stuff where we don't have to wait for COVID information as we get closer to kickoff as well. But yeah, if you want to join me, just know I put a lot of work in every week, and we try and find the markets that people may not necessarily play, and that's how we've been so successful the last 3 seasons.
He's Matt Josephs. I'm Dan Alexander, and we appreciate you tuning in. 2 college football previews getting you ready to go. Make sure you like and subscribe so you never miss any of the great content here at WagerTalk TV and GoldSheet TV. Eric Pauly will be back next week. NFL continues, but hop below in the comments. We'll be answering any questions that you have for Mid-Major Matt, and as I mentioned, follow him on Twitter as well. That's going to do it for us. Appreciate you tuning in. And if you want more info, don't go anywhere. Stay right here on WagerTalk TV and GoldSheet TV.